Today is day 5 for the Come Follow Me study for this week, October 13th through the 19th. His sacrifice shall be more sacred unto me than his increase. Doctrine and Covenants 115 through 120. Friday, October 17th, 2025, Doctrine and Covenants 118. Section 118, Revelation to the 12. 4 of the original members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles had been excommunicated or otherwise removed from office by July 1838 for transgression and apostasy. John F. Boynton, Luke Johnson, Lyman Johnson, and William E. McClellan. This caused great sorrow among church members. On Sunday, July 8, 1838, during a leadership meeting, the prophet Joseph Smith received the revelation recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 118 in response to the plea, "To show unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12." John Taylor, John E. Page, Wilford Woodruff, and Willard Richards were appointed to fill the vacancies in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Section 118. Revelation given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Far West, Missouri, July 8, 1838, in response to the supplication, "Show us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12." Read Doctrine and Covenants 118, looking for the Lord's instructions to members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and the names of those called to fill vacancies in the quorum. The Lord will provide for the families of the 12. Doctrine and Covenants 118, 1. Verily, thus saith the Lord, let a conference be held immediately, let the 12 be organized, and let men be appointed to supply the place of those who are fallen. The following is recorded in the prophet Joseph Smith's history under the title Minutes of a Meeting of the 12. Far West, July 9, 1838, a conference of the 12 apostles assembled at Far West, agreeable to the revelation given July 8, 1838. Section 118. Present, Thomas B. Marsh, David W. Patton, Brigham Young, Parley P. Pratt, and William Smith. Thomas B. Marsh presiding. Resolved, first, that the persons who are to fill the places of those who are fallen be immediately notified to come to Far West, as also those of the 12 who are not present. Resolved, second, that Thomas B. Marsh notify Wilford Woodruff, that Parley P. Pratt notify Orson Pratt, and that President Rigdon notify Willard Richards, who is now in England. Voted that President Marsh publish the same in next number of the Elders' Journal. President Rigdon gave some counsel concerning the provisions necessary to be made for the families of the 12, while laboring in the cause of their Redeemer, advising them to instruct their converts to move without delay to the places of gathering, and there to strictly attend to the law of God. The minutes were signed by Thomas B. Marsh, President, and G. W. Robinson, Clerk. The apostles and prophets are the foundation of the church, and the Lord wished to keep the Quorum of the 12 functioning without any long delay. Another evidence of the importance the Lord places on the presiding quorums. Doctrine and Covenants 118:2. Let my servant Thomas remain for a season in the land of Zion to publish my word. While the rest of the 12 were to go forth and preach the gospel, President Thomas B. Marsh was to continue publishing the Elders' Journal, a responsibility he had while in Kirtland, Ohio. The Elders' Journal was short-lived, running from October 1837 to August 1838. Doctrine and Covenants 118:3. Let the residue continue to preach from that hour, and if they will do this, in all lowliness of heart, in meekness and humility and long-suffering, I, the Lord, will give unto them a promise that I will provide for their families, and an effectual door will be opened for them from henceforth. President Wilford Woodruff said, Brother Brigham left home. He told you that all his family had was a barrel of rotten flour. 200 cents would have bought every pound of provision I left with my family when I left home. But we left our wives, for we had the commandment of God upon us, and we were either going to obey it or die trying. That was the spirit of the elders of Israel, and I blessed my wife and child, and left them in the hands of God, and to the tender mercies of our noble bishops, and those who were acquainted with them know how it was in those days. Vacancies in the 12 are filled. Doctrine and Covenants 118:4-5. And next spring let them depart to go over the great waters, and there promulgate my gospel, the fullness thereof, and bear record of my name. Let them take leave of my saints in the city of Far West, on the 26th day of April next, on the building spot of my house, saith the Lord. In an earlier revelation, church members in Far West Missouri were commanded to recommence laying the foundation of the Far West Temple on April 26, 1839. President Wilford Woodruff later explained that this was a commandment to lay the cornerstone of the temple. In addition, in the revelation recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 118, the Lord instructed the prophet Joseph Smith that on April 26, 1839, members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles were to depart from the Far West Temple site for their missions abroad. By April 1839, most church members had been driven out of Missouri. But during that month, 7 members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles traveled back to Far West. On April 26, 1839, they laid the chief cornerstone of the Far West Temple and took formal leave of the few saints who remained in Missouri before they departed on their missions to Great Britain the following fall, thus fulfilling the Lord's commands. The people of Missouri knew of the Lord's requirement to meet on the 26th of April, 1839, nearly a year later, and they were determined to impede the work of the 12 and stop Mormonism. During the time between the revelation and the appointed day, the whole church was driven out of the state of Missouri, and it was as much as a man's life was worth to be found in the state, if it was known that he was a Latter-day Saint, and especially was this the case with the 12. When the time came for the cornerstone of the temple to be laid, as directed by the revelation, the church was in Illinois, having been expelled from Missouri by an edict from the governor. Joseph and Hiram Smith and Parley P. Pratt were in chains in Missouri for the testimony of Jesus. As the time drew nigh for the accomplishment of this work, the question arose, what is to be done? Here is a revelation commanding the 12 to be in Far West on the 26th day of April, to lay the cornerstone of the temple there. It has to be fulfilled. The Missourians had sworn by all the gods of eternity that if every other revelation given through Joseph Smith were fulfilled, that should not be. For the day and date being given, they declared that it would fail. The general feeling in the church, so far as I know, was that under the circumstances it was impossible to accomplish the work, and the Lord would accept the will for the deed. But the apostles were not to be put off their commanded duty. On the night of April 25th, 1839, the little band of apostles, with a small company of faithful brethren, high priest, elders, and priests, arrived at Far West. Shortly after midnight, on the morning of April 26th, they assembled on the temple lot in Far West, and there they held a conference. President Woodruff described his experience on that day. When the revelation was given in 1838, all was peace and quietude in Far West Missouri, the city where most of the Latter-day Saints dwelt. But before the time came for its fulfillment, the saints of God had been driven out of the state of Missouri into the state of Illinois, under the edict of Governor Boggs, and the Missourians had sworn that if all the other revelations of Joseph Smith were fulfilled, that one should not be. It stated the day and the place where the 12 apostles should take leave of the saints to go on their mission across the great waters, and the Mobocrats of Missouri had declared that they would see that it should not be fulfilled. Having determined to carry out the requirement of the revelation, we started for Far West. It seemed as though the Lord, having a foreknowledge of what would take place, had given the revelation in this manner to see whether the apostles would obey it at the risk of their lives. When the time drew near for the fulfillment of this commandment of the Lord, Brigham Young was the president of the 12 apostles. Thomas B. Marsh, who was the senior apostle, had fallen. Brother Brigham called together those of the 12 who were then at Quincy, Illinois, to see what their minds would be about going to Far West to fulfill the revelation. The prophet Joseph Smith, his brother Hiram, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman Wright, and Parley P. Pratt were in prison in Missouri at the time. But Father Joseph Smith, the patriarch, was at Quincy, Illinois. He and others who were present did not think it wisdom for us to attempt the journey, as our lives would be in great jeopardy. They thought the Lord would take the will for the deed. But when President Young asked the 12 what our feelings were upon the subject, we all of us, as the voice of one man, said the Lord God had spoken, and it was for us to obey. It was the Lord's business to take care of his servants, and we would fulfill the command, or die trying. To fully understand the risk the 12 apostles ran in making this journey, my readers should remember that Wilburn W. Boggs, governor of the state of Missouri, had issued a proclamation in which all the Latter-day Saints were required to leave that state or be exterminated. Far West had been captured by the militia, who were really only an organized mob. The citizens had been compelled to give up their arms. All the leading men who could be got hold of had been taken prisoners. The rest of the saints, men, women, and children, had to flee as best they could out of the state to save their lives, leaving all their houses, lands, and their property, which they could not carry with them, to be taken by the mob. In fact, they shot down the cattle and hogs of the saints wherever they could find them, and robbed them of nearly everything they could lay their hands upon. Latter-day Saints were treated with merciless cruelty and had to endure the most outrageous abuses. It was with the greatest difficulty that many of them got out of the state, especially the prominent men, for there were many men of that state at that time who acted as though they thought it no more harm to shoot a Mormon than a mad dog. From this brief explanation, you will be able to understand why some of the brethren thought we were not required to go back to Far West, to start from there upon our mission across the ocean to Europe. On the morning of the 26th of April, 1839, notwithstanding the threats of our enemies, that the revelation which was to be fulfilled this day should not be, and notwithstanding that 10,000 of the saints had been driven out of the state by the edict of the governor, we moved on to the temple ground in the city of Far West and held a council, and fulfilled the revelation commandment given unto us, and we performed many other things at this council. Brigham Young presided. John Taylor, the clerk, wrote. The council then proceeded to the building spot of the Lord's house, when the following business was transacted. Part of a hymn was sung on the mission of the 12. Elder Alpheus Cutler, the master workman of the house, then recommended laying the foundation of the Lord's house, agreeable to revelation, by rolling up a large stone near the southeast corner. The following of the 12 were present: Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Pratt, John E. Page, and John Taylor, who proceeded to ordain Wilford Woodruff and George A. Smith to fill the places of those who had fallen. After several of the apostles had offered prayers, the assembly sang Adamon, and the apostles left. President Woodruff continued, bidding goodbye to the small remnant of saints who remained on the temple ground to see us fulfill the revelation and commandments of God. We turned our back on Far West and Missouri and returned to Illinois. We had accomplished the mission without a dog moving his tongue at us, or any man saying, "Why do you so?" Ronald K. Esplin said, it might have meant imprisonment, or perhaps cost their lives, if they had been seen. Mobbers who had already driven the saints out of Missouri had vowed to prevent this meeting and thus prove Joseph Smith a false prophet. Certain that the Mormons were beaten and cowed, they had not posted a guard. At daybreak, they discovered with astonishment that the saints had come and gone. The commandment and the revelation had been fulfilled. Elder David B. Haight said, these early apostles departed for their mission, having been spiritually fed and blessed in a manner that would sustain them and their families throughout their many hardships, and inspire their powerful testimonies of the truthfulness of the message of the restored church upon the earth. What a privilege and a blessing to be a small part of this great work. With that heritage, however, comes a great responsibility. The Lord needs messengers to match his message. He needs those who are able to wield the mighty and eternal influence that he has placed in their hands. Doctrine and Covenants 1:18-6. Let my servant John Taylor, and also my servant John E. Page, and also my servant Wilford Woodruff, and also my servant Willard Richards, be appointed to fill the places of those who have fallen, and be officially notified of their appointment. Elders William E. McClellan, Luke S. Johnson, John F. Boynton, and Lyman E. Johnson had at this point fallen into disharmony with the church and had been excommunicated. They had been in the first quorum of the 12 in this dispensation, which was called on the 14th of February, 1835. One of the replacements, John E. Page, also eventually apostatized, but the other three remained faithful. Two of the replacements, John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, later became presidents of the church. John Taylor was ordained an apostle at Far West on the 19th of December, 1838. Wilford Woodruff was ordained an apostle during the early morning meeting at Far West on the 26th of April, 1839. President John Taylor said, I will state that I was living in Canada at the time, some 300 miles distant from Kirtland. I was presiding over a number of churches in that region. In fact, over all of the churches in Upper Canada. I knew about this calling and appointment before it came, it having been revealed to me, but not knowing but that the devil had a finger in the matter, I did not say anything about it to anyone. Brother Woodruff here spoke up and said that he was on the Fox Islands, which were farther away still, and also knew by the Spirit that he would be called to the apostleship. A messenger came to me with a letter from the First Presidency informing me of my appointment, and requesting me to repair forthwith to Kirtland, and from there to go to Far West. I went according to the command. When I reached Far West, Johnny Page, another one mentioned in the Revelation just read to you, was there also. Johnny Page and I were ordained into the Quorum of the 12 at the same meeting. Brother Woodruff was ordained after the scenes of the war at Far West, but I think it was right in the midst of the war when Brother Page and I were ordained. Brother Woodruff was ordained on the cornerstone of the foundation of the temple at Far West on the 26th of April, 1839, when we went to fulfill this same revelation that you have heard read, and I helped to ordain him. Brother George A. Smith was ordained at the same time, and I am informed that he took the place of Thomas B. Marsh, who apostatized.